Hi, this is Zella King from Henley Business School. This podcast is about what I'm looking for when I'm marking, or how to make it easier for me to give you a high mark. I'm going to show you my hierarchy of advice. It's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The point I want to make with this is don't try to do the things at the top if you haven't thought about and provided the things at the bottom. So I'll run through each of these, and then I'll talk more generally about how to package up your work in terms of format, structure, and referencing. This podcast relates both to coursework and to exam questions. The principles I'm going to talk about are broadly the same. So, to start with, my first and most fundamental piece of advice is answer the question. I know it's obvious, but you'd be amazed by how many times, especially during the exams, I write DNAQ in the margins, did not answer question, and it is very difficult to give you any sort of mark above a pass if you haven't actually done what's been requested in the question. So make sure that I don't write that. Make sure that you do answer the question. If it's coursework, look carefully at what's required. Make sure you do each piece of the question, and make sure you think about the balance of marks. If there are two sections, then how are the marks allocated between the two? And you should also allocate your effort and your thinking time according to the division of marks. Don't spend too much time relatively on the piece of the question that doesn't receive a large proportion of the marks. Okay, so let's assume that you have understood the question. Now you need to formulate how to answer it. Well, my next piece of advice is show me the basics. If you write an answer, and this is especially common at exam time, where you actually know nothing about the subject and you are making it up, drawing on your own opinion and viewpoint, and you don't show me any evidence that you've actually turned up to class, that you've actually looked at the lecture material, that you've opened a textbook, then again, it is very difficult to give you anything other than a fail or an extremely low mark. I need to know that you have taken on board some of what's been covered in the course. So you can't just leave your answer to your own conjecture. You need to be mentioning authors that have come up in the course. You need to refer to concepts that I've talked about, get some key terms, refer to some theories, use examples, and ideally draw on evidence that's been presented to you during the course. Why am I asking for this? Well, you came to university to learn about what other academics have found. If you just want to make up an answer based on your own conjecture, you can do that anywhere. A university degree is something that you do in order to build on the shoulders of others, and I want to see evidence that you've actually taken something in from the course that you've been studying with me. Okay, so the next piece of advice to build on this is not only to show that you know what some academic people have come up with, but also that you know some detail. So by that I mean that when you mention concepts, if you can associate them with a theory, that's great. If you're talking about a theory and you know about some evidence it's associated with, also great. If you can link authors to any of these things, give names, the more detail the better, because that gives me confidence that you've actually looked at some of the academic work and that you've got some grasp of what it's trying to say. Also, if you really want to move your mark beyond 50%, then you need to be starting to reference academic papers, not just textbooks. That should be reasonably easy for you to do because I have put some podcasts out there for you about some of the papers on the reading list. So at the very least, I'd expect you to be able to talk about those in some detail and be able to say what the authors were trying to do, how they did it, what some of the key messages from the papers were. So show me some detail. You also need to be able to formulate an answer. Now, you may be able to do that without the detail. If you can do it with the detail, that's obviously great. So that's why I've put these two boxes side by side like this. You need to develop an argument that tackles the question you've been asked. You may have to do that partly from your own opinion. It may not be possible to draw the complete argument from something that other authors have said. What you need to do is try and think how to construct that argument to make it sound logical, and where possible, support it with evidence from academic papers. At the same time, try to show some critical distance from the papers that you mention. And again, the more you can do this, the more likely you are to be able to push your mark above 60%. Don't assume that every author has done their study in completely the right way. There may be weaknesses and limitations in their research methods, in the sample they used. There may be some conceptual issues with their paper, and the more that you can offer some judgment about that, the better. Now that can be really hard to do, I appreciate, but a simple step in that direction is always to think that there are going to be two sides to every argument. So if you're making a case for one way of organising work in a recruitment consultancy, you need to acknowledge that there is another way to do it and talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both approaches before reaching your own judgment at the end of the essay or the end of the report. So try to offer a balanced view. Moving beyond that and moving your mark up to the upper 60s, possibly into the 70s, into a first-class answer, you need to be trying to bring together insights from different authors into your argument. So rather than just listing, for example, what different papers say in a sequence, you need to look for areas of common ground, find ways of contrasting different viewpoints, trying to synthesize, to create a crafted argument out of insights from different pieces of work. It's hard to do if you don't have the earlier steps, because you may not have the detail and the foundations on which to do this. So this is really something that differentiates a good answer from an average answer. That's what I mean by integrate. I mean integrate insights from different papers and try and combine them together to support the point or the points that you're trying to make. Where you can draw on additional material, material in the reading list that I haven't talked about very much, or indeed material, either theories, evidence, authors that haven't been talked about in the course, surprised me. I really like that, because that shows that you've taken the time to think about the subject, to read around, and that you're able to bring in insights in a non-formulaic way. But if you can really do that in an original and creative way, where you offer your own insight into the question, you really have some flair, you're willing to take risks in your answer, to put yourself on the line, so maybe divert from the conventional way of thinking about something and say, actually, for example, I don't think salespeople should be offered a commission. I think they'd be more effective as salespeople if the work was organised and they were rewarded in a different way. So there is nothing wrong with deviating from things that I've said in lectures. I like that. I will recognise that you've taken a risk, and I'll give you some leeway because you've been original, but please don't try and do it if you haven't got these other steps already in place. You haven't shown me that you know the detail of academic papers, that you haven't been able to organise and craft a reasonably sensible argument. So get the other bits right first, and if you can add a bit of your own flair on the top, that is really what differentiates a very strong answer. And I am quite willing to use the 80s and even 90% mark range on occasions. I generally do each year. So for the stronger students, that's something that you can aspire to. So the observations I've made so far relate both to coursework and to exams. If you can get all of these pieces in place, then you've got a very good chance of getting a very good mark. In terms of the presentation of how these things are all put together and packaged up for me, that's a little different between coursework and exams. I'm going to cover the three things in my pyramid here that's trying to depict the packaging. So first of all, grammar and spelling, that is a kind of basic thing that is really important to get right. When you're trying to read something as a marker, if the grammar and the spelling are poor, it's just much harder to see what the person is trying to say. And in exams, when you're doing things handwritten, again, bad handwriting just makes the marker's life so much more difficult, which means that there is just a greater risk that we miss something important that you're trying to say. So I know it's tough when you don't do much handwriting and you have to do it in exams, but please try and make it as clear as possible. In terms of references, When you're doing a piece of coursework, then you need a full bibliography. You need to understand how to reference academic works and websites. There is a convention for referencing websites. I don't really mind whether it's all at the end or in footnotes, but I do want to see that you know how to reference properly and that you don't claim anyone else's work as your own. So make sure you reference everywhere where you should reference in coursework. If you copy pieces of text from other papers, then you must absolutely tell me the source of where that came from. And similarly with quotes, figures, diagrams, anything like that must be appropriately attributed. In terms of structure, again, I don't really mind how you structure the coursework, but I do dislike very long paragraphs, and I dislike a long report that doesn't have subheadings. I think subheadings are a good discipline because it helps you think what you're trying to say and how you're organising your argument. So do use subheadings, do use page numbers, do label any tables that you include or figures, do have an introduction, and make sure you have a conclusion. For exams, because you're under time pressure, my advice would be different. I think do obviously structure your answer with an introduction and conclusion, but don't repeat either the question or repeat something that you've already said. So the conclusion is an opportunity for you to draw out your own viewpoint and opinion. If you've previously expressed two sides of an argument, then you can draw things together and offer your own perspective in the conclusion. Don't waste time, though, on those kind of things. I hope that's been helpful, and I will look forward to seeing lots of really excellent pieces of coursework and exam answers. Thank you.